الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. نويت الكرام والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والإنفاذ والإفادة والاستفادة وحتى لا تفسد في كتاب الله وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء من الهدى ودلالة على خير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and peace and blessings be upon his beloved messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Today is lesson 6 of our 77 branches of, is it happy families? Today we're covering between points number 33 to 38, which are first, point number 33, give preference to others in everything. Point number 34 is honor your family when meeting them. Point 35 will be exchanging gifts with your family regularly. Point 36 is to accept excuses of others. Point 37 will be waking others for the prayer, and point 38 is having a sound balance between work, school, and home. So we'll start with that. I could also mention we also have a toddler room right here, so she could just play there too. So yeah, she'll have fun. There's a lot of toddler toys there. We have a family here today, so she doesn't have to. My daughter goes in there all the time. There's a lot of. Just watch for there's a few that are quite small, so just keep an eye on her a little bit. Or if they're all out of reach, so they're usually on the top shelf, so she should be okay. However she's comfortable with her. Okay, so we'll start with the first point, which is point 33, give preference to others in everything. And that goes back to, there's many hadith where the Prophet ﷺ enjoined us to prefer others to ourselves. Firstly, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you truly believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. There's another hadith that one should love for humanity what you love for yourself. So it's the same meaning, and that one is related by Ibn Majah. And another hadith that after obligatory rites, the action most beloved to Allah is delighting other Muslims. So all of these hadith go back to seeking the pleasure of other people over yourself. So as we all know that when you have many opportunities to seek things out in this world, but when you seek for other people, that there's even more reward. That's the pinnacle, and you can see the opposite of that is to prefer oneself. That you're always thinking of yourself, what you need, and part of the wisdom of that is that when you're trying to always fulfill your own needs, you'll find that you're never satiated. Like you'll always be thinking of the next thing. It will never really satisfy you when you keep seeking for yourself. Whereas when you seek for other people, it really just makes you inwardly. There's more satisfaction, I find that like when you make other people happy, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trying to do good for other people, that you have that sense of fulfillment that this is the right thing to do. Whereas if you're just fulfilling your own wants and desires, it leaves, there's a feeling there of, I don't know what you call it, but it's not, you'll never be fulfilled and you'll keep wanting more and you'll never find happiness in that. So this is especially true of one's own family, that with your own family, when you prefer them to yourself, and that's I think an even greater struggle for the self, rather than, because sometimes when you're with your friends and you're preferring others to yourself when you're outside of the home, it happens once in a while, but
For your family, you're continuously with them. So it happens time and time again, you know, the last, you know, donut in the box, the last, you know, something that everybody wants in the house, like, you know, the last portion of food, the last, you know, thing that everyone is after in the house that they have or whatever treats, and you're preferring others to yourself, that inward, you know, seeking the pleasure of Allah and putting others before you earns this tremendous reward. And that's why sometimes when you think of something good to do, and you have that bit of hesitation, like, should I do it? Should I do it? I really want that thing, but to smile and actually prefer other people over yourself, that, you know, that holding oneself in check and preferring other people with a smile, that is what leads to the most reward. And that's part of the reason why it's sometimes very difficult. Omar, can you get Uncle a chair? Chair. That's why sometimes it's very difficult to implement preferring others to oneself, because one's natural inclination is to prefer oneself. So when you hold yourself in check and you smilingly give something that you actually really wanted, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's an incredible amount of reward. And we see that especially in this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentions that after obligatory rites, the action most beloved to Allah is delighting other Muslims. So when you bring happiness to other Muslims, there's an incredible amount of reward for that. Imam Shirani also mentioned that none of you will lead his companions unless he gives them preference over himself and tolerates their harms and does not compete with them in anything they aspire to. So again, there's this emphasis in preferring others to oneself, like in general, but especially in one's own household. When you're preferring your other family, everyone benefits. And you can see how that increases the ties of love and friendliness amongst all of the family members, because, you know, when people start competing for things in the home, like, that can lead to adversity. But if you give them preference, it increases the ties between all of the family members, and it leads to a stronger household, and one of more love and tranquility in the house. And then I'd also like to add here that this is especially important for teaching the children this, because I think for children it's a lot harder for them to learn to prefer others to themselves, and they're continuously tested on this. That I find it's one of the things that in our household that I have to keep talking about, because children, but their innate nature is to prefer themselves, and it's very difficult for them to, you know, hold your nafs in check and prefer other people for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's almost, you have to keep connecting them, keep reminding them of the ultimate reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in the best of ways, not in a nagging way. It's just, you know, through everyday kind of circumstances that often come up in a family. Like, for example, somebody decides to make pancakes, right? Now, like, do the kids wait and make sure everyone has pancakes, or, you know, prefer, like, say to their sibling, oh, please, you go first? Like, these are things that are you know, difficult for them to take that step and prefer other people over themselves. And part of the way that can help them in overcoming that is seeing the parents doing that, you know, with the children, you know, preferring the children over themselves, preferring one another over themselves. So the children keep seeing that example again and again before them of this, you know, generosity of the self, that, you know, even though you want something, you're preferring others. Another way to teach children that is sometimes you get a gift and it's actually very beautiful, and you love it, and you just, you know, mashallah, and then your guests or whoever gave it to you go away, and you take that gift and you go and give it to someone in need. Like, and a modern day example of that is we have the Muslim Welfare Center here in Mississauga. So for your children to see you live that example of you just received something really nice, you love it, it's beautiful, that you take that gift and you go and give it to someone in need. Or it might be you go and give it to, you have a Syrian neighbor who's new to Canada, or someone else. Maybe it's just your next door neighbor and they're not even Muslim, but you're preferring those people over yourself and your own wants. So these are great examples that can teach your children to also implement this, preferring others to oneself. Because sometimes we make the mistake of the only time we're giving to other people, or places like the Muslim Welfare Center, is when we get something that we don't really want. Like you get it and you're like, oh, what am I going to do with that? I'll go drop it at Value Village, for example, or some other place you don't, and you clearly don't want it. Or you might, go and buy something that you need, and then you take your old thing that you're replacing. Let's say a particular example that comes to mind was during the Syrian crisis, when a lot of Syrians were coming into Canada. There was this opportunity. A lot of them needed help, and there was a call out for, they needed bedding, they needed a lot of things. So some people, when they heard that call, they started giving their old things, like their old bedding, and they said, they'd come and they'd donate it, and they'd say, thank you for this opportunity, this is great because I wanted to upgrade our bedding set, and now we have a new one and I'm really happy, and someone else can benefit from our old one. So we saw that example, but then there were other people who would come into the center and they were bringing brand new things that, the same quality that they were used to in their own home, and buying that for other Syrian families and dropping it off, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also saw other examples of people bringing, like, I'm sorry to say, but like old, really bad things, like they were like bugs in some of the bedding, and it's not things you would even give to an animal. Basically, maybe they hadn't looked through it, maybe it was in storage, I don't know, Allahu alam. But you can see the different grades of a situation, a call out, and the different responses, right? And likewise, when you make the right decisions, that's why, the wisdom of the Day of Judgment, where there are different ranks of believers, and some believers outstrip the other ones, right? The ones who, really prefer other people to themselves, that subhanAllah, the amount of good, the amount of hasanat they're accumulating is incredible. And we all know that it's quite difficult to sort of restrain oneself and overlook one's own needs and prefer other people, but this is, I find that when it's very difficult on yourself, that's the time that I have to do this thing, because there must be a lot of reward in it, because otherwise it wouldn't have been so difficult. The next principle is it's principle 34, is to honor your family when meeting them. And there's so many hadith on this about, because I think oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, that somebody opens the door, they come in, and there's no acknowledgement of that person coming into the house. But whereas what we're called upon to do is to recognize the person, greet them. We're reminded of the example of Sayyidina Fatima Zahra radiallahu anha, that when the Prophet ﷺ came to her house, that she would get up from her place, welcome him in, she would kiss his forehead, take him by the hand, and have him sit where she had just been sitting. Likewise, when she went to visit the Prophet ﷺ, he would get up, he would kiss her on the forehead, take her by the hand, and have her sit where he was sitting. So we see that very beautiful example in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ of how they greeted each other when they came home or when they came to visit one another. There's a hadith by the Prophet ﷺ where he said, 3 practices will keep sincere your brother's love for you, or sister's love. 1 is greeting him when you see him. 2 is making room for him in gatherings. And the 3rd is by calling him by the most endearing of his names. So these are 3 ways that you can honor a person who comes into your household, and especially for your own family members, that you greet them when you see them. You don't, sometimes we're busy with like devices or phones, like to be able, and I'm guilty of this myself, so we can make the intention from this moment forward to not fall into that when somebody comes in, that we stand up to greet them, be smiling of countenance, and welcome them into the place that they're entering. And it was continuously emphasized, the calling them of endearing names, that with especially with family members, these, people have these cute like nicknames for their family members, that they have, that they call them with love, to use those kinds of names, or, even in the English language, we don't often use terms like, my beloved one, or, my dear one, or, these terms of endearment, they're almost lost. I know in the Pakistani culture, they often refer to their spouse as John. I know when I was growing up, when I was asked what my father's name is Moinuddin, but I grew up and I thought his name was John Ahmed. That's what I used to tell my friends at school. John it's a term of endearment. It's, how would you translate it? Like my life?
My light.
My light? My light. So
like
it's
my heart's light. Delight. My heart's delight.
Oh, there's mashallah. So my heart's delight. So that was how my parents would like refer to each other. So that's how my mom always called my dad. So I thought his name was John. So, but you can see that inculcating of that sunnah, that calling your family by these terms of endearment. And subhanAllah, there's a reward every time that we do these things. And they say that when they're talking about these sunnahs of greeting people when you see them, making room for them in gatherings, or calling them by their most endearing of names, that these are for regular people. So what about your own household, right? And these are the people that we most often overlook. Like if a room is crowded, or it might be, just thinking just like common scenario. Everybody's sitting on the, like, whatever sofas you have in the room, and there's not really a place to sit, and somebody comes into the room, right? What happens then? Like, does anybody get up to make room for that person? Because it's from the sunnah, right? And there's a reward for that. And when you do things like that, these small, acts of love for one's family members, that this increases the ties between all of the family. And these days, like oftentimes if all the seats are full and somebody walks into the room, most of the time people don't notice because they're all on devices, subhanAllah. So it's important to revive these sunnahs within our homes. And when we do that, it increases, this is what the authors of these texts keep emphasizing. It increases the love, it increases the tranquility, it increases the feelings of friendship between all of the family members when we revive these sunnahs in our homes. So then they say, how do you honor somebody when they come into the gathering or room or home? They say you meet them with a greeting, greeting them with salam alaikum, talking to them. You have a cheerful countenance, that you're smiling when you meet them. If they're somebody of, mahram, or the same gender, that you embrace them. And they're talking about in general, that when you meet somebody, it's good to go and greet them and be smiling, and when we do these things, you make people feel welcome. And then in this one, they say if they come in, that you lay something on the ground so that you protect them from the dirt. That's obviously in the old days, but you know, make sure they have a comfortable place to sit when they come in, you know, and sit down and talk to them. That these are all great sunnahs. They also say that, they remind us that, you know, sometimes if we're estranged from a certain family member, that to remember, because like sometimes, you know, there's situations where you're living in a household. It's very common where, you know, maybe one person is not practicing and other people are practicing, so they're not really getting along. But still, even despite that one would be, you know, even more careful to implement these sunnahs, that you would want to increase the ties with that person, and by giving them preference, being happy to see them, you know, welcoming and friendly, that this increases the ties. And this is the basis of taala even, right? That we make everyone feel welcome in one's family. They also warn that, you know, you can't belittle anyone. You don't know what their station is. So even if somebody is not practicing in one's household, that you don't know what their station is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you don't know, you know, what their end state will be before they meet Allah. And secondly, you don't even know your own state. Like, how will you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So you're not somebody to judge that person. So rather, you know, despite, you know, whatever differences you have with the people that you live with, that you still strive to implement these things. And if you have any kind of estrangement with a particular family member, and it's difficult for you to implement this, like it's difficult for you to meet them smiling and be friendly and welcoming, and you know, and you find that difficult because you're just not getting along with that person, these are signs that this is actually a source of tremendous reward for you. Because when you're able to contradict yourself, or that inclination of no, I'm not going to do it, or like when you hold that in check and you still do these things despite how hard it is for you, that's where there's tremendous rewards, subhanAllah. They also say, there's another hadith that surely the Muslim has a right that when his fellow sees him, he ought to move up and make space for him, and that's mentioned in Bayhaqi. And then Imam Shireen also mentions that when you call out to a fellow, give honor to increase friendliness between you, that you use terms of endearment with that person. It increases the love between everyone. And he said some ways that you can do that, to call them in a way that is endearing, is also to call by a filial tie. Like we often call, you know, our mother or father by their filial ties, but even for your brother, your brothers or sisters, like saying, "Oh, my sister," like just even saying that, it increases love between you. Like, this is your sister, this is your brother. You know, to say that, like calling somebody by their, you know, reminding them of that tie, it increases the love in that relationship. And they say, as do friendly nicknames. And they say that all of these are important whether the person is present or absent, so that one is accustomed to, you know, referring to people in the best of ways with these endearing names, whether they're there or not. The next principle is principle 35, which is to exchange gifts with your family regularly. Imam Shireen mentions that every few days one should give a gift to a family member. Not even to a family member, just with people in general. And that's another thing that sometimes a lot of people have difficulty implementing, that they're not really giving gifts. They're worried, oh, will the person like it or not? But you know, there's a lot of small gestures that one can do. For example, things like flowers, for example, you can get, or things you know people will like, that most people like. You know, just to take that effort to give people gifts. And that's especially critical in one's own household, because, you know, the people in your household are the people you tend to overlook the most, that you wait for. It has to be Eid, or it has to be someone's birthday for you to do something nice for them. So rather, they recommend that you should do it every, you know, even every few days, just to give somebody something nice that they would like, you know, is you know, there's a great amount of reward for that. And they say that this is especially important if any kind of bitterness has taken place. So let's say you have an argument with someone in your household, that to remove all the bad feelings from that, try and get them something that you think they would really like, some kind of gift, and that can increase, you know, that can overcome that hardship of whatever the problem was in that relationship. There's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned where he said to exchange gifts with one another. Exchange gifts with one another, and you will love one another and shake hands with one another, and the malice between you will go away. And that's mentioned in Tirmidhi, and Imam Malik also mentions this hadith that when you exchange gifts with one another, that increases love, and when you shake hands, that decreases malice. So, Sheikh Faraz was supposed to attend today. Normally we do this session together. So I made the intention, but I have a gift for him in my bag actually that I was going to give him during the class. And it's actually difficult for me to give to him because he knows I have this obsession with subhas. Like I collect certain ones and then I just always have them. But he mashallah, you know, he has something nice, he just gives it without thinking. Like, you know, mashallah, he's always gifting, you know, nice things that he has. He doesn't, mashallah, he doesn't have like attachment for these, whereas I like to hoard them. So I don't give mine out too often. So I have a very nice one that I will give him after the class, inshallah. And I know it's something that I should do because I don't want to give it to him because it's one of my favorite ones. It's also quite rare. So, but inshallah, when you do things like that, I find that there's a lot of reward in it because it's difficult for you, and you like the thing. Often we give things that you buy one for the person and you get one for yourself. There's no hardship in it. But when you give things that you actually want, and that's difficult for you, that's where the reward is. Principle 36 is to accept the excuses of others. That sometimes, you have a disagreement with someone, then that commonly happens, especially in one's immediate household, where problems happen, that when somebody comes and apologizes, and they give you whatever excuse, I'm really sorry that happened, I was really tired that day, you don't start bickering with them, use that as a springboard for, well, you always are like that, you need to be more careful, da-da-da-da-da. Like, when somebody comes with an excuse, you accept it as it is. Why are you going?
Bedtime.
Oh, she's goes to sleep this time. It was nice seeing you, Salika.
We'll be back.
Inshallah. So Imam Sulami mentions a hadith where he says, one whose brother comes to him, avoiding the responsibility of a sin against him, like he's done something wrong, he should accept his excuse regardless of whether he is truthful or lying. If he does not, he shall not come to the fountain or the house. And that's mentioned in Tirmidhi. That sometimes, somebody comes and they have an excuse, they say they're really sorry, but you can tell from how they're speaking that they're not sorry. And we've all seen situations like that. Somebody's apologizing, but you can tell they don't really think they're at fault. So regardless, if somebody's coming and they're apologizing, that one should accept, whatever excuse they give, regardless of whether it's truthful or not, and just let it be, and just accept it, and just move on from that situation. A really good book that one can listen to that talks a lot about a lot of things from the Sunnah is the book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends.
Influence people.
Sorry?
How to win friends and influence people.
Yeah, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So there's a lot of wisdom in that book. I was really surprised because Sheikh Yusuf Welch, who just joined our teaching team, he was telling me that Habib Omer has actually listened to this book in Arabic, and he said that a lot of the principles are very much from the Sunnah, but the Sunnah takes it even further, like a lot of the beauty of that. So even in like a situation like this, I'm sure in the book it would say something like, to be, friendly with people and to accept their excuses, like, to be very understanding. So if someone comes and they're apologetic and they give whatever excuse, that one empathizes with them. You have sympathy for their situation, and whatever they're saying is the reason behind their mistake. So you have empathy for that, and that empathy, it helps them to, it helps to smooth over the situation. Whereas if somebody gives an excuse and then the person, rather than accepting the excuse, starts to bicker or poke holes in whatever alibi they presented, that can worsen relations, right? So it's from the Sunnah to just accept it. Ibn Majah reports that one whose brother offers him an excuse and he does not accept it shall have a sin similar to that of the taxman. I meant to ask Sheikh Raz about that, why the taxman was referenced in that one. But we know that it's actually a sin not to, if somebody's coming to apologize and they give an excuse, that's actually sinful. Ali al-Khawas, he's often referenced in Imam Sharani's works. He's one of the teachers of Imam Sharani. Said that when your fellow comes to you with an excuse, accept it. Especially when it happened a long time ago. And that, you can see that happen a lot, that, somebody makes a mistake, and it might have even been years ago that you made a mistake. I know one example where I had done a mistake. And it was really bothering me because it was in my days when I was studying, and I was in a situation where I was with a friend who was also studying, and I did better than her on a test, and then I turned to her and I said, I guess you didn't study for the test, right? And it laughed. And so, after that, and the sister left, my teacher turned to me and she said, what was your intention in making fun of her like that? And so, so from that, they say sometimes you'll say things without realizing the weight of your words, you just hurt someone jokingly and you don't really think about it. And sometimes we only find out about it on the day of judgment, that we know sometimes we'll say something that really hurts someone, and you keep going and you don't really think about it. But I found in that situation where my teacher pointed out, look what you just said, and really evaluate your intention, that I really, felt really sorry about, what I had said that time. So then, in that situation, years passed, and I think the sister, both of us started having children, we moved countries, but that always stuck in my head. So there was a time where I had to take her aside, and I said, do you remember this one occasion, this happened, and I'd like to ask for your forgiveness. And of course, the sister was like, I don't even remember what you're talking about, Shireen. But because, it wasn't anything to her, but to me, after the teacher pointed out my mistake, it was very big, so it was very difficult to apologize to her. Even just remembering that, like, is you know, difficult. So here he's saying when someone comes to you with an excuse, accept it, even especially if it happened a long time ago. So she wouldn't say, oh yeah, I remember you really had an ego problem. Like, that wouldn't have been the proper response for her. But mashallah, she's very beloved person, mashallah. So she, of course, was not like that. She just said she didn't remember, and that, so that likewise we should be like that. So if somebody comes to apologize for something they did years ago, like, you know, the sunnah is to let it go. So he continues, this is the quote of Ali al-Khawas, who was Imam Shirani's teacher. So when your fellow comes to you with an excuse, accept it, especially when it happened a long time ago. If any of you does not find tenderness in his heart for the fellow, then he ought to blame his own self and say to it, your fellow came to you with an excuse and yet you do not accept it? How many at a time have you violated his right, and when you did not pay any regard to him? As such, you are actually worse than he. So the person came and he apologized, but it's a reminder to you that you've also wronged him probably many times, and so he's better than you. At least he came to apologize. So why have that attitude of you can't accept, you know, somebody's apology? And the scholars also say that leave as much of your right as you can for your fellow and forgive the missteps of people of your acquaintances. So especially in one's own household, that people tend to make mistakes. there's so many. I think with your own household, you make the most mistakes. But when you forgive their missteps and make excuses for them and apologize to other people, that's where there is the most reward. And they also remind us that one should, they say, refrain from being offensive to someone who caused offense to you. So somebody's offended you. So now the proper etiquette for that person is, if someone's offended you, so I think the natural inclination is almost revenge, that somebody's hurt you or offended you, or sort of like, how dare they talk to me like that, or how dare they say that. So when they come, your inclination is to almost lash out at them, that you feel like they hurt you, and your inclination is to hurt them back, like emotionally, through what you're saying. So what the scholars recommend is that, especially in this situation where somebody, was offensive to you, that you should not return that. Do not reciprocate that kind of harm. A story that one of my teachers told us was, there was an incident. This was in Shireen, where, mashallah, there's a lot of scholars that are giants coming out of there, mashallah. So she was telling the story of how there was a squabble in the playyard, and one boy pushed another little boy, and the other one fell down and got hurt. So then, the boys go home, and the family of the boy who got hurt, when he went back to his family and told them what happened, they just from their incredible tarbiyah, their response was, they went out and they got a gift for the bully who pushed him, and they went to his home, and they had their son present a gift to the boy, and to say, he apologized for, I think it was like if he did anything that if he got in his way that day, or caused him any hardship, he wanted to apologize, and here's a gift. So that was just incredible tarbiyah from the parents, that their response wasn't that of anger. It was to teach their child about you know, if somebody harms you, to reciprocate with good instead, not to retaliate or you know, try and harm the other person. And there, with all of this, there's always the disclaimer that these are all in normal, healthy circumstances. Like, I'm obviously not talking about situations of abuse or, you know, there's, you know, a lot of bad things that are happening in some homes with like physical or, you know, psychological abuse. We're not talking about that. We're talking about in a normal situation, you know, where somebody asks for, you know, in all of these things, giving preference, honoring people, accepting their excuses, that's in a healthy relationship. So I'm not saying like if somebody's being oppressed, like physically or psychologically, not to just accept the excuses and keep going. Rather, I'm talking about normal, healthy situations, so that's a bit of a disclaimer. The scholars also mentioned, do not retaliate, as, they talk about why you don't retaliate, because in the situation where someone's wronged you or, you know, provoked you in some way and you're responding to them, the scholars say it's very difficult to respond to them in kind, that even if you're holding yourself in check, that you're not going to overcome, overstep your limits. So you will probably, you know, they've lashed out at you, and if your response is to lash back at them, at least to the degree that they did to you, that the scholars say that's very difficult for a person to uphold. And what is normal, what will usually happen, is that you will do even more damage to that person. It's very difficult to hold yourself in check. So because of that, they say don't retaliate and don't continue the harm. A very common example of that is like in a marriage relationship, or even in a household relationship, a squabble between two parties, whether it be husband and wife or parent and child. Less likely with parent and child, because like the parent would know better, but sometimes parents, it's between its two spouses, where, you know, somebody says something and they've just hurt their spouse, so the spouse will retaliate by saying something even more hurtful to hurt that person. And then it will keep getting more, each person will almost seek to outdo the other person, and it's a very bad downward spiral. Whereas if you implement the sunnah here, where we're talking about holding oneself in check, that even if your spouse is saying something that they shouldn't be saying, or provoking, or something, you know, that you can come, you think of the best comeback and you don't actually say it, you just hold yourself in check, that is the best way to uphold the sunnah, and that's the best way to resolve the situation. Because if you take the same scenario and let it keep escalating, that's how it'll be like a full-blown argument, and you know, it's very difficult for the spouses to overcome that, especially if it gets to be a habit, because they say, you know, a one-off, argument, there's no problem. But if this starts to become a habit in a relationship where, you know, they're continuously, picking on one another, or a spouse, harming the other spouse by speaking to them in a way that hurts the other person, and then the person retaliates through their speech, that it's not the basis for a strong family. Not only that, but for, the children in that family, they're also watching the parents to see how they resolve things, right? So when the parents have this way of how do they resolve conflict? Because the first teachers of children on how to resolve conflict are the parents, right? So when the parents have this sense of, somebody makes a mistake, and the other person, covers for them, or has that degree of understanding, that you're teaching the children in that household, who are seeing and hearing everything, how to resolve conflict, right? That you want to teach them, it's from the Sunnah not to retaliate, not to speak back, and I don't want to say, like, I think it's very common, especially culturally, they emphasize for some reason, not for some reason, but like if there's a conflict in the household, it's the woman who should keep quiet, right? Which is not the case. It's for either party. Sometimes the woman is the one who's upset about something, and she's, just saying things that she shouldn't to the husband. Now, in that case, the husband would be the one to be quiet, right? And not retaliate. He rather, when there's a situation like that one should, look at their external factors. There might be something else happening, and we talked about that in other classes, that it might be they had a bad day at work, or it might be they just had a conflict with a friend that you don't know about, and so they're still, having a lot of anxiety about that. So when we're talking about accepting the excuses of other people, that you should be able to overlook the current situation and just forgive the other people. And they also say that even if the person doesn't ask for your forgiveness, because they say that at night before you go to sleep, that a good practice is to just forgive anyone who's wronged you in any way. Because there's the story of one of the Sahaba that was in the habit of doing that they that the Prophet ﷺ saw them, and I can't remember, I'm going to know the person's name, I'm forgetting, but the companion, he came into the gathering, and the Prophet ﷺ said that this is one of the inhabitants of paradise. So the nephew of that person went to go and stay with that companion and watched him for 3 days, and he said, I didn't see anything particular about that companion that would earn him such a high rank. So in the end, he asked him, what was that, what do you do that could potentially give you this high rank that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned? And he said that before he went to bed, every night he forgives everyone for any wrongdoings they had against him, and not to bring anyone to account because of him. So likewise, we should do the same for others. And the 37th principle is to wake them for the prayer when needed, and that's especially the case with Fajr, or it could be Fajr, or sometimes people fall asleep early and they haven't prayed Isha. So that what the scholars recommend is if you're waking someone up for the prayer, the tendency is to do it sort of like abruptly because you're trying to do it in a hurry, but they warn that and I'm guilty of this, I have to be better at it. I've been trying to improve. The kids have said they can see I'm trying to improve, because before, especially if you have to wake up multiple children and they're big, like teenagers, it takes a long time to wake up each person, and the person's usually tired at that time themselves. So, but what the teachers recommend is that you wake them up with gentleness, because it's very jarring. I'm sure all of us know that it's very jarring to wake up to something very abrupt, even like a very loud alarm clock. When you wake up with a jolt, they sort of warn against that. So they say it's very important to be gentle at that time. And it was interesting because in the book it mentioned that wake them up with gentleness because the ego might become active when awoken with harshness. So you can see how fights can develop, but you're trying to wake someone up very quickly, but you can actually either make them not want to get up, right, because you're just being so hard on them, or you can have a fight with them because their ego is also aroused then, and they're like, why are you being so rough with them, especially when they just woke up? So it's important to do it with gentleness. So the nature of the household, this goes back to, helping one another to be of the best believers, in a gentle way, to encourage one another. And then the final point for lesson 6 was or our final principle is to have a sound balance between work and home or school and home. So a lot of times we get very overwhelmed with one of these fields, and then sometimes the home life suffers. So it's important to, give everyone in the household their rights. So sometimes we might be too overcome with work or school, like, you're just, working so much that you're working from like early in the morning until very late at night, and you're hardly seeing your family or spending time with the family. So it's important to they say it's good to set limits so that one, give everyone their rights. So you have your time for work, you have your time for home, you have your time for, rest, that you're not continuously working like 24/7, or sometimes with school, like the kids wake up very early, they go to school all day, they come home, they're just doing homework the whole time, and then they go to sleep. Imam Ghazali even mentions in his books that it's very important for children to get, times of rest where they, especially a lot of the scholars mention the importance of being out in nature. That brings a lot of rest to the soul. So one should make time for that in one's life on a regular basis. So to take the family out for, for example, picnics, is very healthy. But the main point here is to have limits for these things, because especially with the development of cell phones, like now work is you never really disengage from work, that one is continuously working or texting even, into the late night, or even during dinner you might be texting a work colleague or somebody from school. So it's important to have limits for each of these areas, and to be especially aware of one's family, because as we see over time, like children, as we all know, grow up very quickly. So like your time with them is very precious. So give each person their right. They also say that when you give somebody full attention, that increases the love and friendship between you, that you give people full attention when you're with them, because when you're on your cell phone or you're texting, you're not giving people full attention. That is like the opposite, and that weakens the relationship, and the person doesn't feel like you're listening to them, right? And that's especially detrimental with one's children, or between spouses. That the spouses in the room, like, give them your attention, because you've already been working for how many hours or whatever. So give people their full rights. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, when he turned to someone, he turned to them completely, and he would give his full attention to them. So likewise, we should do the same. If you're in the middle of something and somebody walks into the room, you could tell them, I just need a minute to finish this, and then you put it away. And then you seriously live up to that you finish whatever you're doing, and then you give them full attention. So when we do these things, like, you're sort of, again, giving that person preference over yourself, because maybe you would prefer to get that work done. It would make, your work easier, but you're giving your family members preference, that there's a tremendous amount of reward for that, and it increases the ties of love and friendship within one's family. Yes, and then just to reflect on the passage of time, they say that when children are young, that they continuously crave the attention of the parents, and when you become an old person, that you're craving the attention of your children. So it's like the tables have turned. So we should always, give everyone their rights, inshallah. So that's what lesson 6 was. So we talked about giving other people preference in everything that we can, and to do that even if that means that you're giving things that you want, that you're preferring others to yourself. We talked about honoring your family when meeting them, that, not to be complacent when somebody comes home, like be happy and cheery, you know, to see them, and that increases love and friendship within the family. We talked about exchanging gifts with your family regularly, and so I will make sure I give that gift to us right after the class. And that's something that we neglect. Like, don't wait for an occasion like Eid or you know, birthdays or whatever. That one continuously gives gifts with one another. One of the things I like to do too is, you know, even with your friends, like just reflect on how many of your friends have you ever given a gift to. Although this class is more about family, but that's something to reflect on as well, because you know, when you give gifts, there's a lot of reward. I was thinking of Uncle, mashallah. There was a class here the other night, and Uncle liked the class, and he went all the way home to get a shawl for the teacher, and he came all the way back to give it as a gift, mashallah, even though they had just met. So likewise, like, we should like strive to do these things that bring happiness to other people. We talked about accepting the excuses of others. So when people apologize or, you know, ask for forgiveness and they give a reason, that one accepts them for their word. And 37 was to wake them for the prayer when needed, and to do that with gentleness. That was the main emphasis. And 38 was having a sound balance between one's other realms of work or school with home, because one should have a strong relationship with everybody who's living in one's household. So give each person the time they deserve. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our homes and bless our families, and to help us to be people who implement the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask for his forgiveness for all of our shortcomings, our numerous shortcomings, and to help us to be people of knowledge, so that we're less likely to fall into that which is displeasing to him. Ameen, ameen, ameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Okay, so jazakallah for attending, and inshallah we will continue from next week with lesson 7. I don't know if anyone's I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions or yes.
I
You
just
should
want,
give us